Welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K, and we are available on Google, Spotify, Stitcher, and all your favorite podcast hangouts. Of course, sponsored by the original Wine of the Month Club. And we're going to have some fun today because we have a young man. I'm going to call him a young man. Is that? He laughs at me.
The paint job's good. It's all just crap
Right.
underneath.
Right. This is Chris Miller from Seabold Winery. Seabold Cellars, actually, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And very fortunate to have him in the studio today because he's got an interesting career as well as a master somm, and we're going to peel all of that back as we get into his career and the winemaking side of things. But so happy to have you here, and we appreciate you coming in and sharing the wines with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you are a young man.
Not during harvest. I feel pretty old during harvest.
It is harvest right now.
Yeah, so I took a couple of days off. We get fruit in. I'll be in the vineyard at 2:30 a.m. up in San Benito tomorrow morning. Yeah, picking up fruit, and then we'll work through the day.
Well, it's funny you brought that up because we used to sell a wine. Now, this is my 30th year. We talked about that. And you've got all kinds of things, right? I mean, you've tasted, you're a master somm, you've tasted all kinds of stuff and heard all kinds of stories, right?
I've been pretty fortunate.
Yeah. So we have this, there used to be a wine that was Midnight, it's called Midnight Cuvée. I can't remember the brand now. And, the whole pitch was that they picked at midnight.
Okay.
And I'm not sure what the value of that is.
Yeah.
But you're going to be there at 2:30 in the morning, so what's the value of that?
Well, anytime you pick, anytime you start picking around, some people start as early as 10 p.m., but it's definitely a premium if you get fruit off the vine by about 6, 7 a.m. It's about getting it cold into the winery. The bricks drop down just ever so slightly at night, as well as just, fruit freshness. You don't have to worry about spontaneous fermentations kicking off without you wanting to do so. So it's just about fruit quality.
So that was something that I heard yesterday talking to Francesco and Marco Sartori from a winery in Valpolicella, and we were talking about that secondary fermentation potential with sugar left in the grape and it's left in the wine and in the bottle, and all of a sudden we have secondary fermentation. But in your case, you're talking about picking the grapes, making sure that is it cooler at night, so we have less potential for this problem.
Yeah, so when your fermentations need warmth, so if you're picking the grapes at night, and when you do, we pick into half-ton bins. They start in little tiny bins, and you put them in half-ton bins and put them on the back of your truck, and you bring them out. So depending on how far you're trucking and that kind of stuff as well, if you have half a ton, so 1,000 pounds of grapes pushing down onto the bottom of that bin, you're going to have free-run juice. Now, if it's already warm outside as well, it's going to start acting with the natural yeast on the grapes, which isn't necessarily problematic, but it leads potential for other microbial organisms to start acting on that juice as well.
So where does that juice end up? On the transmission?
Well, it depends on how you take your corners.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah.
So that's interesting. Because you use only natural yeast. And I'm sort of off track because we're going to get back to your career here in a second. Don't worry.
Sure.
But you use only natural yeast. So all of a sudden now free run juice has got natural yeast because the skins have all that millions of different yeast molecules.
Sure. It's like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you're no longer in a controlled environment. Usually what you want to do is you want to get into the winery, you want to get into a tank or the fermentation vessel that you're going to be processing it in, and then you can start kicking that off. You want to make sure it's nice and sanitized and everything's kind of tucked away.
Right.
The problem with the warmth coming in, and it's not so much the alcoholic fermentation, microbes have a really, really hard time below about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. So as long as you're picking, especially at night, if you're picking it when it's lower than 45 degrees, you don't have to worry about any spoilage getting in. That period, especially, this is something you have to be very mindful of when you're doing native yeast fermentations. That period before the native yeast population starts really kicking off and acting on those fermentations, before that really starts happening, it's really exposed and you're giving all this fuel, the sugar, to all these microbes in the meantime. So if you're having a hard time getting that fermentation to kick off, that's when you can have a lot of off flavors and aromas.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So how do you think the days of yore, when we're making, the monks found these wonderful pieces of property in Burgundy and they're making the best wines in the world, they didn't have this technology to understand. They just did it by what? By your trial and error and figured this out, or?
Well, I mean, they were consuming those wines generally younger.
Yes.
So at those kind of times, your storage technology wasn't great. I mean, if you talk about the days of yore, every family just had a big barrel in the basement, and they filled up the barrel every harvest. And, a few months later, the barrel's half empty. It's not like they're topping it up or anything.
Yeah, right. That's true. Right.
So it's got VA and that kind of stuff, which is fine because that's nothing more than vinegar. It helps with digestion.
Well, there you go. So it's all about the health, right?
Yeah. So it's just part of life.
So this is let's go back now. So let's talk about your career a little bit. You've done many things. You're a master somm, which is an extraordinarily difficult degree to get. You're making wine now, and so people are going to say, "What, are you crazy?" And then you've been in the restaurant business, so you're even crazier. So tell me, go back to like what you thought you were going to do before you started doing this.
Sure. God, almost 20 years ago now. I was actually going to Tulane Business School down in New Orleans. I grew up in New Orleans, and had a double degree in accounting and finance, and I was gonna be an investment banker, and that was the plan.
Was it, huh?
Yeah,
well, you had that all figured out.
Oh, I had it all figured out, man. And I was actually working down there a little bit in that, and kind of rolling in the career, and then went to visit, some family up in Washington State. We were going on a ski trip. They live near Mount Baker, which is some of the best skiing in the country, and just wasn't great snow that day. So I was like, oh, it'd be fun. Let's go to a wine tasting. Like, okay. So we went down to Woodinville, Washington, and it's about 45-minute drive or so. It was really nice, pretty. So go down there, and by the second wine of the first tasting I went to, I was like, yep, I'm going to do this for a living. That's it.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So it was crazy.
So we had a little bit of this discussion off camera, but wine is an ethereal product, in my opinion. Probably my listeners are tired of hearing this word, but you don't get it from other produce, and you don't get it from other fruit, and you don't get it from other vegetables. You get it from wine, and you get it from the grape. You might get it from tequila if you have enough, but other than that. So here you are in this tasting room. You're with your friends or your family, and you taste something. Was it a Syrah? What was it? What was this enormous?
So the big one,
epiphany.
like the first wine that we had, it was a Chardonnay, and I had no training, like I had never read a real wine book or anything else like that, and I started giving some tasting notes on it, and the winemaker was kind of giving me this like sideways glance because I was like, oh, I'm getting this and this and this and this and this, and he was like, oh, that's pretty good, man. Yeah. And I was just like, okay, going to the second wine, and it was like, I'm getting like this pistachio note, and then and I didn't know what wine notes were, what they sounded like. Sure. It's not like, I get espresso as their oak. I didn't know any of that.
Right.
So I'm just sitting there and was like, does this smell like meat to you? And it was Syrah. He's just like, yeah. He's like, oh, are you a sommelier? I'm like, sure. Yeah, let's go with that.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, and I was like,
with an accounting degree.
Yeah, I'd waited tables for a while.
Yeah,
and it was really funny.
Well, prior to that, you had waited tables.
Yeah, I'd been waiting tables and working wine a little bit.
Yeah.
I worked for Emerald Lagasse down at Emerald's, and then worked for the
a
Brennan's
little
family.
bit, at least the cuisine and the conversation about.
Yeah, a little bit. Like I was one of the more knowledgeable waiters on the floor at 22 years old.
But now you feel like you knew nothing, but at that point, I pretty much had it going on.
Oh yeah, I knew everything. Yeah, shots enough to pop. That one's in France.
Sure, right. Yeah,
I know a lot.
People are like, woo.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it didn't take much to be the king of the hill.
So it's interesting because a lot of people, I know a lot of friends and family that have pretty good palates. They sense things that they've sensed before, and I always tell my clients, if you really want to start understanding the palate versus the nose and what's going on when you smell a wine, when you're cooking, squish that basil in your fingers, or when you bite an apple, smell it, or if you're going to, swish that plum around in your mouth, and you'll start hoping to identify the character. Mm-hmm. So the other day, unfortunately, I went to the dentist to get my teeth cleaned, and this particular dentist sprays your mouth with iodine, the orange iodine.
Yeah,
and I go, hey, wait a minute.
Brunello.
I've had this before, but the other way, I had it in wine. It's like not a good flavor, but I think it's an important thing. And so the point I was trying to make is that it takes confidence, a little bit of confidence, to express those comments. In other words, if you tasted espresso, or if you tasted something else in the wine, to say it out loud takes some confidence. I know a lot of people have good palates, but they won't express it because they're afraid they're saying the wrong thing.
I think there is way too much even if there's, it's funny, like most of the, there's some exceptions, but most of the wine professionals that I know at the higher levels, like they're very rarely snobs.
Yeah.
Like it's very strange. Like once you've been around it and you're confident in yourself and everything, there's, the people that I have known in my life that have been wine snobs, they weren't exactly professionals and they didn't necessarily know that much about wine.
Right.
And I think people have this misunderstanding about that. So it makes them nervous or like, oh, my buddy Joe, he knows about wine. He has a cellar and just like, he's got 10 cases of wine.
I hear that all the time.
Yeah. And just like, and he says that this is, and you go to Joe's house and Joe has, 2 or 3 different wines and they're all the big brands and it's all this stuff. That's
the most common thing.
Yeah.
And they're Napa cabs, by the way.
Always.
Well, I think that's a very important part of the wine business, because I always talk about, certainly snobbery is not, there's no room for snobbery, because I think people that are in the know and in other words that study this and do this every day like we do, it's more of a humility not to be that way, because you realize you don't know it all and there's plenty to learn all the time.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that all the time, especially with the winery now.
Yeah, of course, and then we'll get to that experience. So I try to tell people it's not about knowing too much or being a snob. It's about really wanting to understand and at least be a student of it, right? And the academic part of wine is very interesting to me, and you just continue to teach and learn as much as you can and travel and smell and taste. And we were with some 2 couples in Beaujolais. We went to Chateau de Jacques and we sat with Cyril Cheroux, and one of the greatest educational sort of tours I've been on, where we were putting our hand in the dirt. He had buckets of dirt from Morgon and buckets from Côte de Pie and those places, and you're able to like smell the dirt and understand it.
Yeah,
and that's fun to do.
Yeah,
when you realize, then you go, this isn't a snobby thing. It's just a fun academic exercise to learn.
Yeah,
and if you can express yourself that way, and the sense of smell is so memorable, right? I mean, you smell something, you could smell it 10 years later, 20 years later.
Yep, brings you back to childhood.
What it was.
I always remember they have that scene in Ratatouille,
yes,
where the guys, the critic, and he's sitting there and he tries it and he like goes back to his childhood with a skin knee or whatever, and he's just like a tear in his eye, and just like you have those moments.
That's what it is. So here you are, you're impressing the winemaker at as a Somm, quote unquote, in a tasting room in Woodinville. And you decide you're going to do this. So what do you do next?
Well, so strangely enough, and it's funny, like I always forget the second part of the story or to mention it, but so we were like, okay, let's go to another wine tasting. So we went to one of the very established places, like it was an up-and-comer premium place, but it had only been around for a few years, but it was like on Robert Parker's hot list kind of thing, DeLille Cellars. So we were driving past a few times and we couldn't find the address. It wasn't marked well. So we're like half an hour late. We get in there. He's like, okay, well, look, sorry, you're going to have to be with this other guy. I have another appointment after you. Like, okay, cool. So we go over there and like the guy's chatting with him, the winemaker's talking with this guy, and he's just like, oh yeah, like, so you're a master somm and a master of wine? He's like, yeah. And my dad asks me, he's like, what's that? He's like, I think he just calls himself that. He just, whatever, and he's a buddy of mine now. His name's Doug Frost. And I teach with Doug now. I told him this story just a couple years ago. And I was like, yeah, we were at the DeLille wine tasting together. It was just my dad, Doug, and I. And then I went home and like Googled Master Sommelier. I was like, there it is. Like, that's what I'm supposed to do. And it was like this kind of sign, like, this guy asked me. Yeah, the guy asked me, he's like, oh, are you a sommelier? I'm like, yes.
You had quite a day, right? You learned what career you're going to be in, and you knew what objective you had for the goal you were trying to get into. Yeah. That's pretty amazing. So that's a task, and you did it in a few years once you decided to do this. You studied and levels 1, 2, 3, then the master, and then...
Yeah, so I mean, I was coming right out of college, so I was kind of used to studying and just, it was just continuation, living like a college kid, and decided I wanted to move to Seattle. I had family up there, wasn't as intimidating, and I loved Washington wine. Yeah. So moved up there and found the best wine restaurant up there. Again, just Google best wine restaurant, Kalen's restaurant. Boom, going there. Literally went there, applied 4 or 5 times before they hired me as a busboy. But I'm like, I don't care. Want to sweep the cellar. They're like, you have to work your way up to sweeping the cellar. I'm like, done. Sign me up. They're like, you're crazy. I'm like, yes.
Possibly.
Yeah. So actually, I was there last week on a visit. And I was trying my wines on for the first time, and they just like got to see some of the old staff
Same
and everything.
chef?
Cool. No, a different chef, but like a lot of the same staff, same owners, same wine director that he and I were waiters together back in the
that's
day.
great.
Yeah.
That's really that's nostalgic to do.
Yeah, it's really fun.
So then, and you were saying this off camera. We know if you read your bio that you were the Somm and the wine director at Spago, which is a very famous restaurant, of course, and a very famous chef. So, when did that come along? Was this after this? Obviously after this job, but how did that come about? How do you get asked, or how do you apply to be the wine director at a place like Spago?
Strange coincidence. I've just been kind of fortunate. Right,
you're just
time
loaded
and
with
place.
these strange coincidences.
It's funny. So so as I started waiting tables at Canlis and worked my way up, and then I was like part-time on the wine team, and they had this new producer in Walla Walla who was a master sommelier, Greg Harrington, who's done very well with Gramercy Cellars. He would come out to the tasting groups just to know the Seattle wine community. So he came out to one of the tasting groups, and he was talking about Walla Walla, and it was like his first or second vintage working out there. And I was like, I love Walla Walla Syrah. He's like, come work harvest. I'm like, okay. So I started going, working harvest with him, and I would literally like get off of work at midnight, drive 5 hours, work crush all day for a day or two, sleep at 3 hours a night, and then just drive back and work again and back and forth, back and forth.
That's
so
brutal.
yeah, so but learned a lot in a short period of time. So it was just very intense with all that. So started making wine, did my first like wines like in 06, released my first one for 07. Greg worked for Wolfgang Puck way back in the day, and he was close friends. Greg Harrington, Gramercy.
Yeah, Gramercy.
Yeah, so he actually used to be worked for Wolfgang Puck, and he knew the corporate wine director for Wolfgang, and he called him up. He's like, "Hey, I need somebody young, the right kind of dumb, and cheap that'll take this gig."
Well, how do you like it so far?
Yeah. So Greg told me, he's like, "You need to take this job." I was like, "Yeah, but I love Seattle. I didn't want to move to LA. Like, I loved doing what I was doing." He's like, "Yeah, let me put it this way. If you don't take this job, you're an idiot, and I don't let idiots work for me. So you're gone either way." And I was like, "Cool, man." So came down
funny.
here. Yeah, came down to LA.
I mean, it's obviously a huge move for a career. Like
Well, I didn't
this.
even know I was supposed to be the wine director. I showed up and I was applying for the sommelier position. Like, "You're the new wine director." I'm like, "Oh,
okay." Here,
cool.
This is the one on what is it, Beverly or on Cannon? Or which
It's on Cannon. Yeah, it's in Beverly Hills.
Right. Because I was telling you a story off camera about his first store in this book called The Last Days of Haute Cuisine by Patrick Hugh. It's a great book about the history of food in America and a little bit about wine. And that when Wolfgang left to go on his own, and his potential partner was Terrell, I think it was Terrell, and they decided to break up and not do it, and he found this restaurant place, and the old one that was upstairs. Was that Melrose? I don't remember.
Sunset.
Yeah. We used to be a place called Kafka's. And Kafka's turns out to be the restaurant of my ENTs, great connection, my sinus surgeon, but his great-grandfather's restaurant. And in the book, Patrick talks about that he had opened a restaurant in Moscow, China, Brazil, and then Sunset. Okay, isn't that bizarre?
Yeah.
And I'm going to take a little bit of our time to tell you the story because it's a really fascinating story. His restaurant in Moscow was visited by the oligarchs. It was Armenian food, Kafka's. And because of his relationship with the oligarchs, that when the Bolsheviks came, they said, "Here is a pass for a train car. You can fill it with whatever you want. Furniture, people, cousins, brothers, people who don't even know. We don't care. And you're going to Siberia. And it's time to get out."
Wow.
So they loads the car. He gets to Siberia. They go across to China.
What was the balance of people to things?
I don't know. I asked that question the other day from my doctor. I think it was stuff with people, but and I don't even know what the I have to look up to see how long that trip is. And anyway, he opens up in China.
Yeah.
And opens a restaurant in China after he goes across the Bering Strait, and then he goes to Brazil for a little while, and he comes to LA, opens Kafka's, and then it becomes Spago.
Yeah.
Which to me is a fascinating story.
Yeah. A lot of these locations, they have histories and they're kind of passed down as people move through.
The history of cuisine in America is a pretty fascinating story. And
Yeah.
Patrick's book is about how restaurants reflect the attitudes of society.
Oh yeah,
and they grow, right?
Yeah,
You
I can
how
definitely see that.
Right? All right, so now you're Wolfgang Puck, and you become the wine director, which is, they've got a pretty serious list, right? Don't they have a grand award from the Spectator?
Well, it was small. We had an amazing cellar. So the two people that were the wine directors. I was only the third wine director he ever had. Michael Bonacorsi, he was a master sommelier. He had started buying and putting together and kind of impressed upon Wolfgang how important wine was. And Wolfgang's a huge wine lover and big supporter of it as well. But he made that a priority, and the person that worked under him for a short time then took over as a gentleman named Kevin O'Connor. He's a local LA guy, and popped around at a few different restaurants. And he was a great wine buyer, like really great palate. So when I took over, we had a small list, but we had a lot in the cellar. And, Wolfgang wanted more exposure on those kind of things. And so I kind of opened up the cellar. But, a lot of the heavy lifting, to be honest with it, was done before I was there.
Yeah.
I polished out some areas, and I certainly put in some time. But, I was standing on some pretty big shoulders.
Well, but you could have screwed it up, too.
Oh, I could have totally screwed up.
Yeah.
I worked hard, but like they did some really amazing things and had the foresight and bought the right people, and everything that I knew about Burgundy, I learned at Spago with Kevin, and
which is a fascinating subject.
Yeah, so it's so many collectors' dinners, everything else. Like it was pretty amazing.
So we talked about Arthur Jace for a little bit. They have this amazing list, well curated, and I told the maitre d', I said, you must have 100 vendors or 75 vendors. He goes, no, I have 100. And so it seems to me, particularly in today's restaurant world, with the minimum wage going up and other issues, and the line cooks now are making what the sous chefs are making, et cetera, that you try to simplify things a little bit, but at a restaurant like that, you need to have this kind of collection of wines for people to enjoy because of the clientele. And how has that changed, you think, in the last, let's say, 10 years or since you were there?
It's hard. I don't know that it's changed too much in the last 10 years. I'd say that it's changed dramatically the 10 years before that, where you have so many boutique brands. And, as a buyer, you almost want to roll your eyes. It's like it's fascinating at first, and you can't wait to see what's new and what's next and what's coming out. And it's so cool that this person's doing this and exploring this region or exploring these grapes or these techniques. But at the same time, you're like, does the world need another wine brand?
Well, hey, welcome to my world.
Yeah. So, and there's arguments for that, and I get it, and I see it, having worked on several different sides of it. And, I'm our national sales manager. I run the show, and I'm the winemaker and the janitor and the plumber and the electrician.
You chose that profession.
Oh, no,
friend.
totally.
I can't help you with that.
Yeah, no, there's not a pity party. But,
you don't want to come to my side either, trust me.
Oh,
So maybe the whole industry is just a mess.
Totally. And then you're just berated with calls and this and that, because those salespeople have to do that, and everybody's just trying to do their job. So it's hard wading through that. I think now one of the great things about it, you're inundated, and sometimes there's a lot of noise. Much like when you get to this area of like when you have enough different restaurants, when you've got a bunch of old school Italian restaurants, and you have your steakhouses, and you have your seafood restaurants in a city, all of a sudden you have this population, and a semi to somewhat educated population, where all of a sudden, like, you can have like the bakery that specializes in a certain thing, and you can have these places. And for wines and that kind of stuff, I think that you can find wines that go to very particular philosophies. And so, you can align yourself with those things instead of just going to this broad scope.
Yeah, right. So, a restaurant like Spago, certainly. But then there's the other philosophy. So there's still a large list, obviously, the grand list. I mean, I don't know how many SKUs there are, but
I left around 4,000.
Wow.
That was not a good idea. I did.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
I was going to say a few hundred, but 4,000.
Yeah, so I took it over at 300, and I brought it to about 4,000.
Yeah, I think maybe you had an impact there. Yeah. But then I went to José Citron's restaurant in Venice. He's a Michelin-starred chef, and he's got a very short list at a steakhouse, a very concise list. Now,
I love those lists.
You do. So I was looking at it going. And we brought our own Bordeaux that day. We brought 2 10s, one from Saint-Emilion and one from Saint-Julien, so we compared and contrasted. But he doesn't. You can't do that there. And I thought, okay, it's kind of interesting because this is an expensive restaurant. It's aged beef and all that, and you have a very limited selection of things to taste. So I was I'm not disappointed, but I was just like, okay, that's an interesting approach.
Yeah.
And I understand the approach.
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot of money and energy and time and inventory to store all these
You're
other
paying
things.
rent on that table.
Yep.
You're paying rent on the storage.
Downstairs and the storage and things. And I think it's kind of the way my cousin owns a restaurant in Pasadena called Mi Piace, and they have a very extensive Italian list, and he's like backing off a little bit. Just get instead of 3 Montefalcos, we're going to have 2.
Yeah.
Something bizarre like that, right? But it's an interesting thing. So I think it's an important part of the restaurant business. And for the wine side, we're talking about the winery here. I see, and I had this conversation that drives me crazy because I see it every day, but you're talking about brands. And there was always in the industry, look, if Cake Bread fermented all their juice and they had 10,000 extra gallons, they didn't have much, but 5,000 gallons, whatever, they would go move that somewhere else and somebody would bottle it and blend it, whatever.
Totally. Or they launch a
business.
new brand just because. A lot of bulk juice this year, so let's launch this new thing and we'll push out. And they already have the distribution channels.
Right.
I mean, that's why some of these, particularly for liquor industries and that kind of stuff, and I'm not throwing shade at anyone.
No.
But it's if you own the trucks and you already have like the relationships and you're like, well, we're going to move this through these retail shops, if we're going to move these through these generic restaurants, chains, and that kind of stuff, it's like, oh yeah, you had this Pinot Grigio. I know how passionate you were about this $4 Pinot Grigio.
Right.
We're going to swap it out for this other $4 Pinot Grigio,
Which happens to be ours because we bought the juice.
Yeah, because we have the extra juice or whatever, So it's those kind of things where they just pump it out,
Right.
And that was like, to be honest with you, when I started this up for real, I was making a few hundred cases a year just for satisfy my own curiosity, just play around with a little bit and have fun. And when we did the deep dive into buying the winery, like I took some time and I really asked myself, do I have something to say, and is it a different message than what is already out there? And after thought, I was like, yeah, no, I really think we do. And that's when I decided to go forward with it.
So that's a very pertinent point. Not unlike the point at the Wine of the Month Club. When my dad started this business, it wasn't to sell more bottles. It was to curate for his customers the best values he could find. And so we chose the wines in 1972. His first 4 were Chablis, actually, French Chablis.
And how many Chablis were imported in the States by then?
You know what they were? It was $6.49.
Yeah.
A fifth. You call them fifths back then, right? So, but the point was not how much can I sell. The point was how can I service the wine drinking public. In this case, it was Palos Verdes Estates, a very affluent neighborhood of Southern California. And in your case, it's like I want to tell the world about my philosophy towards winemaking.
Sure.
I'm not going to try and pump as many bottles into the logistical system to get wine throughout the country as I can. It's to tell a story that I want to tell about what I think my contribution to this industry is going to be, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's still a huge jump, right? You putz around, you make some wine, a few hundred gallons, but now we're going to invest.
It's different.
And when did that happen?
2017.
Oh, recently.
Yeah. So I've been making wine in this facility. It was a friend of mine's facility up until then, a few years before that. And he very unexpectedly passed away. And so the family asked me to come in and kind of look over things and make sure everything was like still going well. I was one of his closer friends in the industry. And yeah, we got to talking and I wound up buying it and just jumping into the deep end. And it's been wonderful and horrible and great and absolutely atrocious. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Well, it's like golf is a good walk spoiled, right?
Yeah.
But that's interesting because you knew of the business, you understood the chemistry, you understood the logistical part, buying grapes, crushing them, doing all those kinds of things. You hadn't taken the risks necessarily, not as big a risk as doing this. So it's a facility. You bought a winery.
Yeah, we own a winery.
And complete with equipment and everything.
And
wow.
it's a very different thing than making wine. Like running the winery itself, just the physical premises, is kind of a 20-25 hour a week job. So
just that part.
Just that part.
And so now we need to have some grapes. to crush.
Yeah.
And there's no estate grapes that I understand, right?
No, we buy in. We have partners for all our fruit.
Okay, so you go out to the vineyard and say, hey, listen, I think of the wine drinking public may or may not understand this to its extent, but there's a lot of ways to own a winery license. I own a winery license. I have an O2. It hangs at a winery called Sonoma 980, and that's when I buy juice or grapes, this is where it goes.
Sure.
Right? Or you could be like you, where you own a facility to crush grapes and manufacture the wine and bottle it and do all the rest.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily own the vineyards where the grapes come from, and that's why there's farmers.
Yep.
That's why we have farmers that grow grapes, and they don't make wine.
Yep. And they're much better at that than I'm ever going to be, and I leave that to them.
You know, I have a brother-in-law who has an amazing green thumb. Mine's brown. My wife's is brown. We kill if you buy one of those idiot-proof germination things, we kill it. Doesn't really matter.
No,
But he goes to Napa not too long ago, and he's driving by Silver Oak, and they're got little saplings, and they're planting them, and he stops by the guy, and he says something. The guy says, take whatever you want. So he takes like 4 or 5 of these saplings. I don't know why the guy allowed that. And so he comes on with this little thing. And now he's got these beautiful vines in Glendale against a wall in a concrete planter.
Yeah.
It's like, they're beautiful. And he showed me the grapes he just harvested, recently. So I can't do that, and it sounds like you can't either.
Well, no, actually, I mean, we spend a lot of time in the vineyards. I'm in the management on a couple of our partners, so we go through. But I generally defer to their best judgment. But there comes a point, especially when you're really spending time. And that was one of the biggest changes for me. Even though I was doing winemaking before, like, being around the vineyards leading up to harvest. There's one thing of like showing up, working harvest, like, oh, we're going to make some wine at your facility, and like show up and like, oh yeah, it's being harvested tomorrow, and then working on it for a couple weeks and going back to your day job. And that's fun, and you do learn a lot.
Right.
But working in the vineyard for the weeks leading up to that, dialing in when to pick it, that's been the biggest change. And I think it's shown through in like the wines that we're making now, where you can really see what's happening with the grapes over a protracted period of time, what's worked day over day, week over week, harvest over harvest, and being able to dial that in more, it allows you to do less and less with it once it's in the winery.
Which is what you want to do.
Yeah.
Right. You said this when we were tasting the wines, which are gorgeous. There's no acidification. There's no sugar. There's
no watering back, no acidification. Nothing, right. Native yeast.
And so I suppose, and we had this discussion briefly, but I suppose in the definition, and it's a scary term, and I wrote an article on LinkedIn about it, but the term natural wine, people bring it in. It is natural. What the hell? I go, first I want to say, what's unnatural about planting a grapevine and watering it and then picking it? What's unnatural about that in general? Right? Yeah. Nothing. In fact,
monoculture is not natural.
Yeah, right.
Grapevines are supposed to grow up trees, and they just start climbing vine, and we trellis them out. That's not natural.
Yeah, it's farming itself in this case would be not natural, right? So define that for us. But I suppose if we landed on something, it would be as less influence as possible by the winemaker and other things, not touching it, not playing with it, not doing things to it. In this case, this is what you're doing, and producing the best value or the best wine you can get, best profile you can get out of the grape from what you're given. Yeah. Because that's, when we talk about the study of wine, and I had this conversation the other night with some friends, when we talk about the study of this conversation about the study of wine, it's really to help understand the influences of what makes a wine great, what a winemaker needs to not do, what the terroir provides us, and terroir mining, your philosophy. Yeah. In my opinion, the terroir is not just the soil and the air and all the things that happen during the harvest, but your philosophy going into it is part of the terroir. Well,
it's really interesting, because I get this question sometimes from other winemakers even, but, from wine populists or, wine buyers or consumers, and they're like, oh, what's your winemaking philosophy? And I was like, okay, well, there's a couple different ways to define that, but they're also just like, oh, so what are you looking for, when you're making Pinot Noir? I'm just like, well, I'm not looking to do anything. Right. I don't have, I guess the best way to say it is I don't go into any of our wines with an agenda. So I have some ideas of things that have worked for grapes that I've seen like this in the past. So, and especially once you know vineyards better and better. So with the grapes coming in, I'm just like, oh, well, I've been here, I've seen that, I've made wines from grapes like this, with these kind of numbers and, with this kind of, harvest time and with this kind of condition. And what I have found has worked and made the tastiest wines has been to do this, and looking at the grapes, like when they come in, I really just try to make them the best version of what I think they want to already be. Right. I see too many people try to muscle something into their style when you see a house style. And if you taste through like our lineup, like there's sometimes some common threads, but it's a somewhat disparate style at times.
Well, particularly from different vineyards, you're going to get different things if you're not trying to muscle it like you're talking about.
If you're not trying to muscle, I can't tell you as a buyer how many times, and again, I never name names, but I can't help it. When I would have these, these people come in, they're like, oh my God, we're super passionate about the farming and the winemaking. We're very hands off. And I would try and like, here's our 10 single vineyard Pinot Noirs. Yeah. And I try them and they all taste exactly the same.
Right.
And I'm like, I taste, I was a buyer. I would take so many appointments every single day, all the time. I was around wine 24/7.
Right.
And I was like, if I can't tell the difference between these, like, why are you making them?
Right.
Like, for us, it's a struggle for me philosophically, and I hope I can keep this way. Like, we'll see over time.
Right.
But for me, if I can't tell the difference between 2 bottles of our, Pinot Noirs blind, like, it gets downgraded. So it's no longer a single vineyard wine.
Right. That makes sense. I just tasted through a bunch of there, though these were district designated and they were different, but I agree with you.
Yeah.
We see that all the time here.
Yeah. I just don't see the point.
Ridiculous. Some of the junk we see, but that's the way it goes. I tell my clients, if you planted it, you're going to pick it. If you picked it, you're going to ferment it. If you ferment it, you're going to make juice out of it. And if you're going to juice it, you're going to bottle it. And if you're going to bottle it, you're going to sell it. And, sometimes it's not what you expect, or you're going to blend it off with something else. And I get all that stuff. Yeah. That's what comes to me sometimes.
Well, it's just, the unfortunate part is for me, and, who's to blame for this? Who knows? But that we've gone to this place of marketing hyperbole.
That's right.
Where people just like this, unless they heard the words, the greatest, and this and that and blah, 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 like they don't have any interest. And I'm just like, even if, so-and-so person, and that's not to blame, like critics are extremely useful. Of course. How else do you know quality? It keeps a lot of producers in place and it makes a lot of people more honest about what they do in making quality wine, but that's not the end all be all. And I haven't met a single critic that would tell you that they're the end all be all. They're like, if you taste some wines and generally speaking, my high scores line up with things that you like more, then you should probably follow me.
Right.
Or you can follow somebody else that goes along with your palate. I'm not here to shape your palate. I'm simply saying these are quality wines and other people have other opinions on them, and you should find something that works for you, whether it be a critic, whether it be a wine store. I mean, that's the great thing about going into a wine shop or a wine club. If you go into a wine store and you have almost like a mini concierge sommelier kind of moment with them, they get to know your palate, especially over time, that builds over time. They're like, hey, if you like this, try this.
That is a very good point, and is a very important part of why this business exists and why I'm still alive compared to the hundreds of clubs that are out there, despite the winery clubs. And that's part of the conversation earlier that I never got to, which is these €1 liter wines that are coming from Europe and flooding the marketplace through Groupon and other sources socially. Yeah. And people are buying this stuff. So there's a lot of juice on the market right now. And
totally.
we have 2 good crops coming that it's just going to be more available. But
yep.
I want to go back a little bit to the ethereal part of this. You were talking about crafting a wine that tastes good and that people want to drink, right? And I get all the spectrums. I mean, I get the stuff that's completely acidified and acidulated and all the rest of the stuff, and grape sugar and coloring and all. I mean, you would.
It's nuts. Like they send you anytime you have a winery, because we get some supplies from labs and that kind of stuff, like cleaning supplies and everything too. And they'll say like, and here's our other products.
Yeah,
and they send you like huge, like old Sears and Roebuck's, kind of style, like catalogs, telephone books. Like I don't even know if kids know what telephone books are.
Yeah, they probably don't.
But these just huge catalogs of all these different things, and like that will fix this, fix that.
I have a quick story. We were in Ranch Cucamonga, which I don't know if you haven't read, a book called Tangled Vines by Francis Deaconspiel. It's a fabulous book about, maybe you already know some of the subjects, arson, corruption, fraud, murder in the wine business. But she talks about how the wine trade in California started in the 1700s in Ranch Cucamonga. Uh-huh. And anyway, out there's still a couple wineries. And in fact, you probably don't get that far out, do you?
I've been through there a few times. But
there's a winery off of the 10 freeway by Ontario Airport, actually between the freeway and Ontario Airport. It was called Guasti. Okay. It will dwarf any winery you've seen in Napa, Washington, Oregon, anywhere. It's huge. Uh-huh. 2 giant river rock buildings that made tons of wine back in the day. Yeah. And I don't know when it stopped, but it's totally dilapidated now. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, that back then the wine trade was a totally different business. It's a huge facility. Yeah. Anyway, she talks about the progression of wine in America and how it got to Napa and, arson, fraud, the whole thing. Is a really interesting story. But I totally forgot why I brought that up. Oh, because in Cucamonga, there's still a couple wineries. They're legacy wineries. They're screwing around.
Tourists, come
makes
through.
Makes a bunch of sherry.
Wines.
He actually makes pretty good cream sherry.
Yeah.
I'm not going to mention any names because he's a friend. But he made good Zinfandel from those vines around the airport, actually, tainted with jet fuel. And, and he had these 1,500-gallon redwood vats. And I'm out there, this is a few years ago, and current vintage of Zin, probably a year or two in the barrel, and he pours it off, and it's like orange. It's like this color. Yeah. But the character's great. And I go, well, gee, I don't think I can sell this to my customers. Just when you pour in a glass, it's going to be kind of offensive, but it certainly has great character. He goes, we'll fix that. So we go into his lab, which is an old Nord refrigerator, and it's empty except for a bottle of Mega Red or whatever that stuff is called. Yeah. And he drops it in the glass, and bling, it turns into this beautiful, ruby color.
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
I said, I can't do that.
It's absolutely nuts.
But if you go to the other direction, where you need to do some things. You talked about the harvest and the bacteria, and you want to do it when it's cooler, and that'll help you from having the sulfite, put some CO2 on, SO2 on there, because you want to protect the crop. You're going to protect the crop, right? Yep. No matter what happens. But I don't want to taste such a rustic wine because I did absolutely zero to it, right? Yeah. I mean, wines come in here, we're biodynamic, and which is great. I think it's a great approach, and I think there's some value to that, and there's some vibrancy to those wines. But when they're so rustic that they're not pleasant, I have a problem with that.
Yeah. So, I was having this, I was doing a ride along with our distributor, California distributor today, and we were talking about that, and, we went to a couple of natural wine places, and some were really good, and some, less so, but, or some interesting choices. And you try some of those wines, and it's an interesting debate. And, frankly, where I fall on it, like, I didn't start making the wines that way out of like some strong philosophical argument. I never really did much to my wines before to begin with. Like, I just thought that Monterey lent itself very well so that you didn't have to do that.
Right.
And frankly, if it gets to the point where I have to intervene, I feel as though I've already kind of screwed up a little bit. But I think more importantly than the specifics of it, because natural wine it's gotten a great rap and kind of overrated in some ways, and it's gotten a bad rap in some others, especially amongst like the established, circles for it, is that when you're doing it or you're buying it indiscriminately, where you're just like, oh, it's natural wine, therefore it's good, like, you're dead wrong. Most, right. Like, let's be clear, good like point. From a gallon volume perspective, most wine sucks.
Right.
Like, most of it is just as, whether it's natural, whether it's, manufactured, whatever it is, most wine sucks. Yeah. Burgundy is a very small place. From a volume perspective, most Burgundy is average stuff.
Thin and acidic and not very good.
Yeah. I mean, we have a self-selection process and bias by what's worth importing.
Sure.
So, when we come to the States and that kind of stuff, like, or if you go to a nice restaurant in Burgundy, those sommeliers have self-selected. But if you go around to all the estates and everything, like, it's fine. Most of it's fine to average.
Yes,
it's okay.
That's right.
So we're really talking about already at that top 20%, right. Or top 30% maybe of the wine world, We actually, when you look at statistics, we define premium wine. I forget what it was at, like $14 a bottle retail, which is like, you tell that to another wine professional that hasn't done their work on that side of things. If you talk to MWs, they're like, yes, it's $13.99. Like that's it. They know exactly. They study that side of things. That's the vast majority of wine.
And that's the floor stack at Vaughn's Market, which has been sugared and who knows what else.
But, it's instead of just like brushing that off, because I've had talks with distributors and other friends. One of my oldest friends in the wine industry, I worked with him in Seattle. His big thing was like, well, if the wine's yummy, then you can have a talk about the rest of it. But if it doesn't taste good in your mouth, like, why are you bothering?
Why are you bothering?
So, but you have to look at that. That's what most people are drinking. They're spending $20 or less. And like people that are spending $20 on a bottle of wine, they're probably middle class to upper middle class.
Yep.
And they're bringing that home and they're drinking wine several nights a week and they want something affordable that they can sustain. And $25 is a moment to spend that extra $5.
Sure it is.
And it's a scary moment.
Yeah.
Because there's all these things they don't want to be wrong.
You look at the label, you look at the price.
Yeah. And how do they tell all these things? Right. And one of the strangest markers for me, they have some big wine brands that like, some people like, oh, well, I only drink this. And I'm like, they have that at Rite Aid.
Yeah.
Like, you think that Rite Aid has the greatest wine buyers? And I'm not making fun of Rite Aid, but like, oh yeah, the sommelier at Rite Aid, like to pick this out special. Like, if you can find it at Rite Aid, that means that they make a lot of wine and it's everywhere because it's at every Rite Aid or CVS or whatever. It's everywhere. So they make a lot of it. If you make a ton of wine, you're probably screwing with it in the lab.
You have to.
And what have you? You have to.
You have
There's
to.
no way you can make
the model doesn't
that
survive.
much wine. It doesn't survive. Like, it's made in a huge vat and it's made in the Central Valley or in the Central Coast and it's made in a big concrete pillar. It's outside, and it's just this big anonymous vat of whatever.
You're scaring me. The other night we went to dinner at a local restaurant we love, and there's a couple always there, older couple, and the waitress bought a case from us, and she really enjoyed the wines. And then the couple next to us left her the leftover of one of those crime things. What those crime?
Oh yeah, the 9 crimes or high crimes or something. Yeah, it's like $10-12 or something.
It's an augmented reality.
Yeah, you use your phone on it.
The guy tells a story. I didn't know it was Australian guys, so I just found out that it's Australian. And the wines are really bad. Yeah, they're really bad. I mean, they're the sugared up, acidulated junk.
Oh, you put enough sugar in it, like
it's terrible.
Yeah.
And so I go, bring it over here. I want to. I've never tasted one because no one brings it to me, so I want to taste it. I go, this is really bad. Yeah. And they're getting 12. Like you said, that's fine wine. $12.99.
Yeah.
I've seen it on sale for 10.
Like, no, but I spent more on this one. Instead of $10, I spent 12.
Right. Yeah. So I suppose it's up to us as a group, your club, your winery, clubs like mine that are legitimately trying to find great values in the industry and best representation of what these things should be. Because I always tell my clients, look, if I send you a Gewürztraminer from Sonoma and you don't care for it, then you probably shouldn't go into the wine shop and let somebody sell you one because you're not going to like them, because this is a great example of what it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
And so you help refine
somebody with
palates.
integrity that actually says, this is a great example. If you don't like it, probably not for you as a category.
And here's a great study on your own palate.
Yeah,
right?
I don't love all varieties and wines. No. Like I don't like.
You've learned to appreciate them, but
yeah, and they have their moments. And I've had the rare exception, but there are some wines that I'm just not a huge fan of, and that's okay.
It's funny you mentioned the Burgundy story, because almost invariably when somebody brings me Burgundy and they start with the one that's labeled Pinot Noir, I don't care for them. Yeah. There are a couple stars that seem to pop and the prices are valid.
And sometimes it happens.
But even the Louis Jadots of the world, they're just okay. There's much better values in the California side of Pinot Noir that have more character and more expressive of where they're from than some of those low end Burgundies. But some of the high end Burgundies are very special wines. So tell me then, what's going on at Seabold, and what can we expect next, and where can I get some?
Sure. So Seabold, we, after working with these vineyards, I started kind of kicking around Monterey in about 2012, and with a buddy of mine who had planted a good portion of Monterey for Estancia when he worked with them. So he knew the area pretty well, and he was a viticulturist. So went around to a bunch of the vineyards and started making a little bit of wine in 14, 15, 16. Then I actually started like honing in on the areas that I thought had the most potential and the different vineyards. Started talking with the farmers more, started getting more interested in them. And after we started kind of learning what worked best where, we went to site-specific wines for Seabold, where we're doing, Burgundy and Rhone varietals under those. But, there was also a lot of wines that I wanted to experiment with, different varieties, new vineyards, that I didn't want to have the pressure of putting on Seabold, but they still had to go somewhere. So for the first few years that I make a wine, it'll usually go under Bold. So, and
I see, okay.
Yeah, and they're usually about half the price of the Seabold wines. So, and they'll be like by the glass in restaurants, retail shops, that kind of stuff.
So we have the Bold line and the Seabold line.
Yeah.
And are they generally together when they're in the stores or at the restaurants? Or are they sort of...
Some accounts do both, or you'll see like, Bold, Pinot Noir by the glass, and you'll see some of the Seabold wines on the, the by the bottle list and that kind of thing. But it's a lot of fine dining restaurants. We have a few retail partners, that kind of stuff. We have a little taste room.
New varietals, new vineyards, new ideas. What are you playing with?
So I love making Albarino. And
really?
so,
okay,
yeah.
that's Walla Walla Albarino.
Monterey.
Monterey.
Yeah,
sorry,
so we do it
Monterey.
out of Arroyo Seco. Right. It actually works really well there. We do a little bit of skin contact on it. Not orange wine, but a little bit of skin contact.
You must know Emmanuel Camigi.
Not well, but I know him.
Yeah. So he's making Albarino out of pure rat.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So this... no, actually, he's making Grenache Blanc. I'm sorry, it's Grenache Blanc.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, we tasted. Yeah. So, but Albarino's becoming quite popular, actually, and I've seen it more domestically than before.
Yeah.
I see a lot of Spanish ones still, but Castillo de Leon type places. But how's it doing then?
It does extremely well. Like we've had
still aromatic and
it's aromatic. It's fresh. It's it's funny when it's really strange to me when I hear somebody describe what they like about a wine, and they're like, I like really big and bold and plush, so I love Pinot Noir. Like that's not what that wine is. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So they just buy wines off of names because we're very varietally obsessed.
Yes.
So if you want something like that's fresh, fruity, easy to drink, but still fresh, so acidity, because people don't like the word acidic, but fresh they get.
Yes.
I was like, okay, you just described Albarino.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, Sauvignon Blanc, I love it, but it's a little too green for me. Like, yeah, Albarino, do that instead.
I love doing that, particularly in my home when people ask for whatever.
Yeah.
It's an important thing, and we'll wrap up with this idea because you're talking about it. To choose a wine, and since you've been a somm or a wine director for somebody at a table, and they say, "What do you like?" and if you bring them something, maybe they don't like it, and they send it back. I don't know this. I'm sure there's a million scenarios, but that's a hard thing to do. You got to think about everything. You got to think about who you're talking to if you can. You got to think about what they're eating. You got to think about the mood they might be in. There's a whole bunch. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've gone home myself and thought, I feel like this, and open it and I go, gee, I don't feel like this.
Yeah.
I feel like something else, because there's enough difference. Maybe your job as a somm and a wine director is to do a really good job, or do the best job you can in connecting all the dots to present a wine that you think somebody's going to enjoy.
Yeah, it's a little bit of interpretation and a little bit of an algorithm, kind of putting it together. Especially, and I think a lot of sommeliers in their first year or two in the business as well, they're very excited about things. And they want to, and it's great to have that passion. They want to bring those things to people, sometimes at the expense of listening to the people. However, they're just like, oh yeah, I like this and I like this. And they're just like, and sometimes people do, when I go into restaurants, I'll ask what are you excited about right now? I want to dig in on that, but I also have a pretty open palate to those kind of things. So I think it's about finding the balance of what you're excited in and what you really believe in, but also still listening to the guest. At the same time.
It's saying, and I was talking to the somm at Disney's. Did you know there's a restaurant at Disneyland that costs $15,000 for 12 people?
Yeah, the Club 33.
That's the main club. Yeah. It's above that. It's called 21 Royale.
Oh yeah.
So I had that somm in, and he's a very interesting guy, and he's like, I if they send a bottle back, I come back to the table. I said, I'm sorry, it didn't work out. Tell me what you buy when you go to the store every day to buy wine, so that I can make that evaluation, the proper evaluation, right? So, as a somm, as a master somm, and actually I'm going to wrap up on this. Emmanuel and I were talking about this idea, and he says, I went to Cordy Brothers and they poured me an Armenian wine, and now not only do I have to compete against them because he's making wine as well, but I get to learn about them.
Yeah.
Because this pursuit of academia in the wine world never ends. So here's now this region, and I had a wonderful woman here last week from Armenia. And they've gone from 27 wineries to 54 wineries. There are millions and millions of dollars in constructing these things from Central European money.
Yeah.
And they have started producing some palatable, interesting wines from indigenous grapes.
Sure.
And so how do you, as a master somm now, making wines, which is a 4-hour, half a week job, 80-hour week job, keep up with and understand what's going on in the wine world for just your general education?
Part of it is tracking interesting lists of sommeliers that I think do a good job. That are kind of on the cutting edge. And social media kind of helps with that too. Like you kind of see trends, like you'll start seeing the same wines pop up in different places. I'm part with, distributed by a really, really great distributor who's a little bit on that cutting edge a little bit as well. So I can kind of hear those things from the sales reps and from them as well. When you travel around, I love looking at wine lists, like going through a wine list is like doing a crossword puzzle or something like that. So like going through those things, seeing where things are popping up, seeing where things are trending. It's pretty easy to kind of keep on. And then the things that interest you, kind of dive in a little bit deeper. But knowledge is at your fingertips, like incredibly easily now. So I literally just get on the internet for everything now.
Yeah, right.
So the Guild of Sommeliers is great. It's a little more classic knowledge based, but just Google it, different articles that come up. They've got, the wine world has no shortage of really amazing writers now. And it's like coming out. I mean, we always had the great classics and everything, but if you wanted to learn about wine before, you had to go to Tom Stevenson or Hugh Johnson or Jansen's Run. Sure. Like you had to go to 3 or 4 people, and some of them specialized especially in an area or two.
Sure.
Like we have so many amazing writers now. So there's already so many great books that are coming out, and being able to dial in those specialties and live in those places. You're starting to see people go overseas and live there for a year or two and then write a book about it. I have
this, every Burgundy maker that comes through here, I'm like, listen, you got any cellar jobs, for the summer, next summer, maybe if I get my wife to do it with me.
I can live in Bowdoin for 3 months,
Yeah, right. Yeah. The problem is Mrs. K may not join me. That could be a problem.
And I'm not sure she'll be here when I get back.
That's right. That's right. Chris, it's been a great pleasure having you here. I hope we can do it again.
Thanks, me too.
We'd love to see you up in Monterey and tour that area. Actually, we're probably coming up to Concours d'Elegance next year, so
nice.
We'll swing in there and see what's going on.
Yeah, have a drink first.
I will.
Yeah, cool.
Cheers.
All right, thanks. Cheers.
Thank you.